A millionaire asked his virgin best friend for a child, but when she gave herself fully, before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. He never thought 35 would feel like an ending, until today. The elevator's soft hum filled the silence as Ashton Reeves descended from the 42nd floor of the medical center. His fingers absently straightened his navy tie, a nervous habit he'd developed in boardrooms, now surfacing in a place where money couldn't buy the answers he wanted to hear. 6 months, maybe less, Dr. Langston had said, sliding the test results across the mahogany desk like a business proposal gone wrong. The hormonal imbalance is progressing faster than we anticipated. Your fertility window is closing, Mr. Reeves. Ashton had nodded then, the same composed nod he'd perfected through hostile takeovers and million-dollar negotiations. But now, alone in this descending box of steel and glass, something inside him felt hollow. The lobby's marble floors echoed with his measured steps as he made his way toward the revolving door. Outside, Seattle's autumn rain painted the city in shades of gray that matched his mood. He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over his assistant's contact. Cancel the Portland meeting. Reschedule the investor call. Instead, he found himself dialing a different number, one he'd memorized at 17 and never forgotten. Leora. Her voice came through warm and slightly breathless, probably rushing between the library stacks. Ash? You sound different. What's wrong? 20 years of friendship had taught her to read the spaces between his words. She'd always been able to do that, see through the walls he'd built so carefully around himself. Can we meet? Tonight? He paused, watching the rain streak down the floor-to-ceiling windows of his building's lobby. I need to talk to someone who actually knows me. A brief silence, then her gentle laugh, the same one that had gotten him through his father's funeral, his first business failure, and countless nights when success felt lonelier than failure ever had. Of course, the usual place? Benedetto's Cafe, their spot since college. Tucked away in Capitol Hill, where the coffee was strong and the conversations were real. Where Ashton Reeves' hotel mogul could just be Ash, the kid who'd shared his lunch money with a quiet girl who always brought books instead of friends. 3 hours later, Ashton sat in their corner booth watching Leora navigate through the evening crowd. She moved with that particular grace of hers, unhurried, thoughtful, as if she were reading the room like one of her beloved novels. Her dark skin glowed under the cafe's warm lighting, and her natural hair was pulled back in a style that somehow looked both professional and effortlessly beautiful. She slid into the seat across from him, her brown eyes immediately searching his face. You look like you've seen a ghost. Maybe I have. He wrapped his hands around his coffee mug, drawing warmth from the ceramic. How do you ask someone to give you something they can't get back? Leora tilted her head, that familiar crease appearing between her eyebrows. What are you talking about, Ash? He took a breath that felt like diving off a cliff. I'm losing time, Leora. My body is failing me, and I need to ask you something that's going to sound insane. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to that gentle tone she used with anxious students at the library. Try me. I want a child. The words came out raw, unpolished, but not with a stranger, not through some clinical process with donors and contracts. I want... He met her eyes, seeing his own vulnerability reflected there. I want it to be with someone who matters, someone who knows that beneath all this success I'm still just the scared kid who couldn't save his dad. Leora's hand moved slightly toward his on the table, then stopped. Ash, I know how it sounds. I know what I'm asking. His voice cracked slightly, years of emotional control finally showing fractures. But you're the only person who's ever looked at me and seen something worth saving. The only person who never wanted anything from me except my friendship. The cafe hummed around them, other people's conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine, the gentle clink of cups on saucers, normal life continuing while theirs balanced on the edge of something irrevocable. Leora's eyes glistened, and for a moment she looked exactly like the 16-year-old girl who'd held his hand at his father's grave. What exactly are you asking me, Ashton? He leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. Have my baby, Leora. Not as a favor, not as a transaction, but as us. As the two people who've been finding each other for 20 years. She stared at him, her lips parting slightly in surprise. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the city clean. And in that moment, suspended between question and answer, both of their lives hung in the balance. Because some requests change everything, and there's no going back. Some silences hold more weight than words ever could. Leora's apartment felt smaller than usual when she unlocked the door 3 hours later. The familiar scent of lavender candles and old books couldn't calm the storm brewing in her chest. She set her purse down on the small kitchen counter, her movements deliberate and slow, as if sudden motion might shatter the fragile equilibrium she was trying to maintain. "Have my baby, Leora." Ashton's words echoed in her mind as she moved through her evening routine. She filled the kettle, selected chamomile tea from the wooden box her grandmother had given her, and waited for the water to boil. But her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her favorite mug, the one with the faded quote from Maya Angelou that read, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd left him sitting in that cafe booth, his question hanging between them like a bridge neither of them knew how to cross. "I need time to think," she'd whispered, and he'd nodded, that same understanding nod he'd given her when she'd needed space after her mother's death, when she'd struggled through her master's program, when anxiety had kept her awake for weeks. He's always been patient with me, she thought, sinking into her reading chair by the window. Outside, the city lights blurred through the rain-streaked glass, creating abstract patterns that reminded her of the impressionist paintings in the art books she'd loved as a child. Her phone buzzed on the side table. A text from Ashton. "Take all the time you need, I'm not going anywhere." Such simple words, but they carried the weight of 20 years. She remembered the first time he'd said something similar. They were 17, and she'd been crying in the school library because Marcus Whitmore had asked her to prom as a joke. Ashton had found her there, had sat beside her without saying a word until she was ready to talk. "I'm not going anywhere," he'd said then too. And he hadn't. Through college, through her parents' divorce, through her father's struggle with alcoholism, through her decision to remain a virgin, while her friends moved through relationships like changing seasons, through the quiet battles with anxiety that sometimes left her breathless in grocery store aisles or frozen in crowded spaces. Ashton had been the constant, the safe harbor, the friend who never judged, never pushed, never expected her to be anything other than exactly who she was. But this is different, she thought, pressing her palm against her chest where her heart hammered against her ribs. This changes everything. She pulled out her laptop and opened a new document, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Writing had always been her way of processing thoughts too big for her mind to hold alone. What he's asking for isn't just a baby. It's my body, my heart, my future. The cursor blinked at her, patient and persistent. But maybe it's also what I've been waiting for without knowing it. The thought surprised her. She'd never been the type to dream of marriage and babies, not like her sister Cassidy, who'd been planning her wedding since she was 12. Leora had always been content with her books, her students, her small but meaningful life. She'd told herself that solitude was a choice, not a consolation prize. But sitting here now, imagining what it would mean to carry Ashton's child, she felt something she hadn't expected, a flutter of longing so profound it made her breath catch. She'd never been with anyone, because she'd never found someone who made her feel safe enough to be vulnerable, someone who saw her anxiety not as a flaw to be fixed, but as a part of her to be understood, someone who didn't try to change her, but who loved her exactly as she was. Someone like Ashton. "Have my baby, Leora." The words took on a different meaning now, not just a request for a biological function, but an invitation into something deeper, something that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. Her phone rang, jolting her from her thoughts. Cassidy's name appeared on the screen, and Leora almost didn't answer. Her sister had an uncanny ability to sense when Leora was wrestling with something important. "Hey, Cass, you sound weird. What's wrong?" Leora closed her eyes. "Nothing's wrong. I'm just thinking." "About what? And don't say nothing because I can hear that brain of yours spinning from here." Leora found herself smiling despite everything. What if someone asked you to do something that scared you, but also felt like maybe it was what you'd been waiting for your whole life without knowing it? Cassidy was quiet for a moment. "That's oddly specific, Lee. What's going on?" "I can't tell you yet, but what would you do?" "I'd probably be terrified," Cassidy said softly, "but I'd also ask myself, what am I more afraid of, taking the risk or living with the regret of not taking it?" After they hung up, Leora sat in the growing darkness of her apartment, her sister's words echoing in her mind. She thought about Ashton's face in the cafe, the vulnerability he'd shown her, the trust he'd placed in her hands. She thought about the 16-year-old boy who'd lost his father and the 35-year-old man who was facing the possibility of losing his chance at fatherhood. She thought about the woman she'd been, content in her solitude, and the woman she might become if she said yes to this impossible, beautiful, terrifying request. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Ashton. "Whatever you decide, our friendship matters more than anything else. I love you, Lee. Always have." Leora stared at the message, her heart swelling with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Love. He'd said love. Not in the way she'd always dreamed of hearing it, but in the way that mattered most. Honest, unconditional, true. She picked up her phone and typed back, "I love you too, and I need to see you tomorrow. I have an answer." Because sometimes the most terrifying choice is also the most right one. Sometimes saying yes is the easy part. It's the conditions that reveal who we really are. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Pike Place Market as Leora made her way through the familiar chaos of vendors and early shoppers. She'd chosen this place deliberately, somewhere public enough to feel safe, but personal enough to matter. This was where Ashton had first brought her when she'd moved to Seattle for graduate school, overwhelmed and homesick. Where he'd bought her the first coffee that didn't taste like cafeteria water and shown her that this strange new city could become home. She found him waiting by their usual flower vendor, hands tucked deep in his coat pockets, shoulders slightly hunched against the autumn chill. When he saw her approaching, his expression shifted, hope and fear dancing behind his careful composure. "Lee." He stepped forward, then stopped, as if unsure whether to hug her or maintain the distance that had somehow grown between them overnight. "Hey." She managed a small smile, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Walk with me?" They fell into step together, weaving through the market's familiar rhythm, past the fish throwers and their theatrical calls, past the elderly woman who sold handmade jewelry and always remembered their names, past the corner where street musicians filled the air with melodies that spoke of dreams and heartbreak. "I didn't sleep last night," Leora said finally, breaking the careful silence between them. "Neither did I." Ashton's voice was quiet, almost lost in the market's symphony of sounds. They paused near the overlook where Elliott Bay stretched out before them, grey-green and endless. A ferry moved slowly across the water, carrying its cargo of commuters and tourists toward destinations unknown. Leora gripped the railing, drawing strength from the solid metal beneath her palms. "I keep thinking about what you said, about asking someone for something they can't get back." She turned to face him, studying the familiar planes of his face, the strong jaw that had first caught her attention in their high school literature class, the deep-set eyes that had seen her through every major moment of her adult life. "But I think you're wrong about something." Ashton's eyebrows drew together slightly. "What do you mean?" "You said you wanted someone who matters, someone who knows you." Leora took a breath that tasted of salt air and possibility. "But I don't think you understand what you're really asking for, what it would mean, what it would change." A couple walked past them, the woman laughing at something her partner whispered in her ear. Normal people living normal lives, unburdened by impossible requests and life-altering decisions. "I'm saying yes, Ash." The words came out steadier than she felt. "But not to what you think you're asking for." Relief flooded his features, followed immediately by confusion. "I don't understand." Leora turned back to the water, watching a seagull dive toward the waves. "You want this to be clean, simple, a favor between friends. But that's not what you're asking for, and it's not what I'm offering." She could feel him waiting, patient as always, letting her find her words in her own time. "If I do this, if I carry your child, it won't be some clinical arrangement. It won't be me doing you a favor and then going back to our regularly scheduled friendship." Her voice grew stronger, more certain. "It will be me giving you everything, my body, my heart, my future. And you need to understand that before you say yes to my yes." Ashton was quiet for a long moment, his hands still buried in his pockets. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible above the market noise. "What are you saying, Lee?" "I'm saying that if we do this, we do it with truth, complete truth." She faced him fully now, her brown eyes meeting his with an intensity that made him step back slightly. "No pretending it's just biology. No acting like it won't change us. No going back to being just friends afterward, because we won't be just friends anymore." A vendor called out behind them, advertising fresh salmon and Dungeness crab, but the sound felt distant, muffled by the weight of what hung between them. "I'm a virgin, Ash, by choice, because I've been waiting my whole life for someone who would see me, really see me, and love what they found there." Her voice trembled slightly, vulnerability cracking through her careful composure. "And if I give that to you, if I give you my first time and a baby, and all the complicated, messy, beautiful parts of what that means, then I need you to understand that it's not just a biological function for me. It's everything. Ashton's face had gone pale, his careful businessman's mask slipping to reveal something raw and uncertain underneath. I need you to want me, not just my willingness to help you. I need you to choose me, not just accept my offer. Leora's hands were shaking now, but she pressed on. And I need you to be honest about what this really is, because I think you're not just asking for a baby. I think you're asking for a family, for someone to choose you back, for a reason to believe that love exists even when everything else falls apart. A ferry horn sounded across the water, long and mournful. Ashton stared at her as if seeing her for the first time, this woman who had been beside him for 20 years, but who was suddenly, terrifyingly, beautifully more than he'd ever allowed himself to acknowledge. "Lee," he started, then stopped, seeming to struggle with words that had never been difficult before. "I'm not asking you to love me the way I—" She caught herself, the admission almost slipping out before she was ready. "I'm just asking you to be honest about what you want, about what this would really mean, because if we cross this line, there's no going back to who we were before." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small piece of paper, folded carefully in half. "My answer is yes, but only if your question changes." Ashton took the paper with trembling fingers, unfolding it to find her careful handwriting. "Ask me to be the mother of your child, because you can't imagine doing this with anyone else. Ask me because I'm the one you want, not just the one who's available. Ask me because you're ready to love what we create together." He looked up at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "And if I can't promise that? If I don't know how to be what you need?" Leora smiled then, sad and brave and beautiful. "Then we say goodbye to this dream and stay friends, because I'd rather have you as a friend than lose you trying to be something more." The market bustled around them, life continuing its relentless forward motion, while they stood suspended in this moment of choice. And in the space between question and answer, both of them began to understand that some decisions don't just change your future, they reveal who you've always been underneath. Because the hardest truths are often the ones we've been avoiding our whole lives. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you've been afraid of the wrong thing all along. Ashton sat in his car in the Pike Place Market parking garage for 20 minutes after Leora left, staring at the piece of paper in his hands until the words blurred together. The concrete walls around him felt fitting, cold, grey, protective, just like the ones he'd built around his heart. "Ask me because you want me, not just because I'm available." Her words echoed in the confined space, each repetition hitting harder than the last. He'd spent the entire night thinking he understood what he was asking for, believing he had control over the narrative, but Leora had just rewritten the entire story, and now he was lost in a plot he'd never seen coming. His phone buzzed. A text from his assistant. Henderson meeting moved to 3 p.m. Portland investors confirmed for Thursday. Business. Numbers. Contracts. Things that made sense, that followed logical patterns, that didn't require him to excavate parts of himself he'd buried so deep he'd forgotten they existed. But instead of responding to the text, he found himself driving toward a destination he hadn't visited in 3 years. Lakeview Cemetery sprawled across the hillside like a quiet city of memories. Ashton parked near the familiar oak tree and walked the path he could navigate, blindfolded. Section 7, Row M, Plot 15. The headstone was simple, elegant, just like the man it memorialized, Thomas Reeves, beloved father. "Love is not what you say. Love is what you do." Ashton knelt beside the grave, brushing away a few fallen leaves from the granite surface. "Hey, Dad. I know it's been a while." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of autumn and the distant sound of traffic from the interstate. Normal life continuing while he sat here trying to figure out how his own had become so complicated. "I think I've been lying to myself." The words came easier than expected, spoken to stone and sky, and the memory of a man who'd never judged him for his failures. "About what I want, about what I'm afraid of, about Leora." He remembered the last real conversation he'd had with his father, 3 days before the heart attack that stole him away. They'd been sitting on the back porch of the family home, watching teenage Ashton mow the lawn with more enthusiasm than skill. "That Fielding girl," his father had said, sipping coffee from his favorite mug. "She's good for you. She's just a friend, Dad." Thomas had smiled, that knowing smile that had always made Ashton feel transparent. "Son, the best marriages start with friendship, and the worst ones start with everything else. We're 17, nobody gets married at 17. "No," his father had agreed, "but someday you'll be 27. Then 37. Then you'll wake up one morning and realize that the person you've been looking for has been right there all along. Ashton had rolled his eyes then, the way teenagers do when parents accidentally stumble onto truths too big for young hearts to hold. But now, kneeling in the grass beside his father's grave, those words felt prophetic. "She wants me to want her," he whispered to the headstone. "And the terrifying thing is, I think I do. I think I always have." I just convinced myself it was safer to keep her as a friend. A couple walked past on the main path, holding hands and speaking in hushed tones. Ashton watched them pause at a grave several rows over, the woman placing a single white rose beside a headstone before they continued on. "I've spent 18 years building this company, Dad, creating something that would make you proud, something that would prove I could be strong enough to handle whatever life threw at me." His voice cracked slightly. "But I don't know how to be strong enough for love. Not the real kind, not the kind that requires me to trust someone with the parts of me that are still broken." He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a photo from 2 summers ago, Leora laughing at something off-camera during their annual camping trip to Mount Rainier. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her face free of makeup. Her smile so genuine it had made his chest tight when he'd taken the picture. "Look at her, Dad. Really look at her." He held the phone toward the headstone as if his father's spirit could somehow see through the screen. "She's beautiful, isn't she? Not just her face, though God knows she takes my breath away, but her mind, her heart. The way she sees the world like it's a book she's excited to keep reading." The memory surfaced unbidden. Leora at 19, crying in her dorm room after her first panic attack. He'd held her until the shaking stopped, whispering promises he'd somehow managed to keep. "I'm not going anywhere. You're not broken. You're perfect, exactly as you are." "I think I've been in love with her since we were kids," he admitted to the autumn air. "I just called it friendship because that felt safer. Because friends don't leave, friends don't die, friends don't break your heart into pieces so small you never recover." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't entirely true. Because Leora could break his heart. She was probably the only person on Earth who could completely destroy him, because she was the only person who'd ever seen past his defenses and loved what she found there. The fertility thing. It wasn't really about wanting a baby, was it? The realization hit him like a physical blow. It was about wanting a reason to need her, a way to keep her close without having to risk telling her how I really feel. He sat back on his heels, staring at his father's name carved in stone. But she figured it out anyway. She saw right through me, just like she always does, and now she's asking me to be brave enough to want what I want, instead of hiding behind what I think I need. His phone buzzed again. Another business text, another reminder of the life he'd built, brick by careful brick, each one designed to protect him from exactly this kind of vulnerability. But as he looked at that photo of Leora laughing in the mountain sunlight, Ashton realized that all his success, all his careful planning, all his protective walls meant nothing if he was too afraid to fight for the only thing that had ever really mattered. "I need to tell her the truth, don't I?" He traced his finger along the edge of his father's headstone. "All of it. Even the parts that scare me. Especially those parts." The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the cemetery lawn like confetti at a celebration he wasn't sure he was ready for. But as he stood up and walked back toward his car, Ashton felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The terrifying, exhilarating possibility that love might be worth the risk after all. Because sometimes the thing you're most afraid of losing is the thing you've never actually had the courage to claim. Some conversations can only happen once, and they change everything that comes after. Leora was reorganizing the children's section when she heard the familiar chime of the library's front door. She didn't look up immediately, focused on the task of arranging picture books by reading level, but something about the quality of silence that followed made her glance toward the entrance. Ashton stood just inside the doorway, still wearing the same charcoal coat from that morning, but something fundamental had shifted in his posture. He looked raw, vulnerable in a way she'd only seen once before, at his father's funeral when he'd thought no one was watching. "We're closed in 15 minutes, she called softly, aware that Mrs. Hartwell was still at the reference desk helping a college student with research. "I know." He walked toward her section with measured steps, his hands empty of the usual phone or tablet that typically occupied them. "I was hoping we could talk, privately." Leora set down the copy of Where the Wild Things Are she'd been holding and really looked at him. His hair was slightly mussed as if he'd been running his fingers through it. His eyes held an intensity she hadn't seen since the night his hotel chain's first property had opened to rave reviews, a mixture of terror and determination that meant he was about to take a leap he couldn't take back. "Mrs. Hartwell," Leora called toward the front desk. "Would it be okay if I closed up tonight? I can finish the inventory tomorrow." The elderly librarian looked up with a knowing smile that suggested she'd noticed the handsome man who'd been waiting for Leora to acknowledge him. "Of course, dear, take your time." Within minutes they were alone among the towering shelves, and the comfortable silence that libraries seemed to cultivate like a living thing. Ashton followed Leora to her favorite alcove near the back, a small reading area with 2 armchairs and a window that overlooked the school's courtyard. "You went to see him, didn't you?" Leora settled into her chair, tucking one leg beneath her. "Your dad?" Ashton paused in the act of sitting down. "How did you get this look? Like you've been having a conversation with someone who can't talk back, but somehow still gave you the answers you needed." She studied his face with the careful attention she usually reserved for her favorite novels. "It's the same look you had after you decided to expand the hotels to Portland, and when you finally stopped blaming yourself for not being there when he died." He sank into the opposite chair, shaking his head with something that might have been amazement. 20 years and you still see things I don't even realize I'm showing. That's what happens when you pay attention to someone." The words came out gentler than she'd intended, carrying more weight than simple observation. "So what did he tell you?" "Your dad." Ashton was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on something beyond the window, where the last of the autumn light was fading into dusk. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, "that I've been lying to myself about what I want, about what I'm afraid of." He looked at her directly then, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "About you." The library's heating system hummed quietly in the background, a steady rhythm that seemed to match the sudden acceleration of her heartbeat. "Leora, I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me get through it before you respond. Because if I stop, I might not have the courage to start again." She nodded, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. "I didn't ask you to have my baby because you're convenient or available, or because we're friends, and it would be uncomplicated." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I asked you because the thought of creating a life with anyone else feels impossible. Because when I imagine a child, I see your eyes, and your kindness, and your strength. Because the idea of facing parenthood without you, without your wisdom and your patience and your beautiful heart, terrifies me more than never being a father at all." Leora's eyes filled with tears, but she remained silent, letting him find his way through words that seemed to be costing him everything. "I think I've been in love with you since we were 17 years old, sitting in AP English, arguing about whether Elizabeth Bennet was too good for Mr. Darcy." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You said that real love wasn't about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone whose imperfections fit with yours like puzzle pieces. And I remember thinking that I wanted to spend my whole life figuring out how we might fit together." A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't move to wipe it away. "But I was scared. Scared that if I told you how I felt and you didn't feel the same way, I'd lose the most important person in my life. Scared that if you did feel the same way and something went wrong, I'd lose you anyway. So I convinced myself that friendship was enough, that wanting more was greedy." He stood up suddenly, pacing to the window and back, his nervous energy filling the small space. "The fertility diagnosis, it wasn't really about wanting a baby. Not at first. It was about realizing that time isn't infinite, that I might run out of chances to tell you that you're not just my best friend, you're the love of my life. You're the reason I work so hard to be better than I was yesterday. You're the voice in my head that keeps me honest when the world tells me that money and success are enough." Leora's hands were pressed to her mouth now, tears flowing freely down her face. "And when you said yes this morning, when you told me that you needed me to want you and not just accept your offer." He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Lee, I want you so much it terrifies me. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to raise children who have your compassion and your intelligence. I want to grow old with you and argue about books and travel to places we've only read about." His voice cracked with emotion. "I want to love you the way you deserve to be loved, completely, honestly, without fear or reservation. And I want you to love me back, not because I'm asking you for a favor, but because you choose me. Because after 20 years of being your friend, you think I might be worth the risk of letting me be something more." The silence that followed was profound, filled with years of unspoken longing and the weight of words that couldn't be taken back. Outside, The security lights flickered on in the courtyard, casting long shadows across the empty playground. Leora looked down at their joined hands, his larger and slightly calloused from his weekend woodworking hobby, hers smaller and ink-stained from grading papers. They fit together perfectly, just like she'd always known they would. "Ashton," she whispered, her voice thick with tears and something that sounded like wonder. "Are you asking me to marry you?" He lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I'm asking you to let me spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice when you said yes to loving me. Because some truths are worth waiting 20 years to speak, and a lifetime to live. Some moments are so perfect they feel stolen from someone else's life, until you realize they're yours to keep." Leora's apartment had never felt smaller or more sacred than it did that evening. She moved through the familiar space with new awareness, acutely conscious of Ashton following behind her, of the way the lamplight caught the gold flecks in his eyes, of how her hands trembled slightly as she set down her keys. "I should make tea," she said, then immediately felt foolish. They'd just declared their love for each other in the library, and she was worried about beverages. "Lee," his voice was soft, patient. "Look at me." She turned from the kitchen counter where she'd been unnecessarily arranging items that were already perfectly organized. Ashton stood in her living room, surrounded by the bookshelves that held her most treasured stories, and he looked like he belonged there, like he'd always belonged there. "Are you nervous?" he asked. The question was so gentle, so understanding, that it broke through her anxiety like sunlight through clouds. "Terrified," she admitted with a shaky laugh, "but not for the reasons you might think." He moved closer, stopping just within arm's reach, but not touching her yet, giving her space to breathe, to think, to choose. "Tell me, I'm not afraid of you. I'm not even afraid of what happens next." She gestured vaguely toward her bedroom, her cheeks warming. "I'm afraid of how much I want this, how much I want you. I've spent 29 years being careful, being safe, being the girl who plans everything and never takes risks. And now I feel like I could jump off a cliff just to feel what it's like to fly." The words tumbled out in a rush. "I've never wanted anything the way I want you, Ash. It's terrifying and wonderful, and I don't know how to be this version of myself." He reached out then, his fingertips barely grazing her cheek. "What if I told you that you don't have to be any version except exactly who you are right now? What if I told you that the careful, safe, planning part of you is exactly what I fell in love with?" Leora leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. "What if I told you that I've been planning this moment for longer than I want to admit, that every book I've ever read about love, I pictured you?" When she opened her eyes, his expression had shifted into something that took her breath away. Wonder and desire, and a tenderness so profound it made her chest ache. "Every romance novel?" he asked, his thumb tracing along her jawline. "Every single one." She smiled through tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Even the terrible ones where the heroine makes obviously stupid decisions. Especially those ones, because they made me appreciate how easy it would be to love you." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and careful, like she was something precious he was afraid of breaking. But Leora had spent 20 years being treated like she might shatter, and she was tired of careful. She deepened the kiss, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer until there was no space left between them, until she could feel his heartbeat against her chest and his surprised intake of breath against her lips. "Lee," he whispered against her mouth, and her name sounded different in his voice. Like a prayer, like a promise, like the answer to a question she'd been asking her whole life. "I know what I want," she said, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. "I want you. I want this. I want to stop being afraid of my own feelings." The apartment was quiet around them, insulated from the outside world by drawn curtains and the kind of intimacy that makes everywhere else disappear. Ashton's hands framed her face like she was art he was trying to memorize. "Are you sure?" Instead of answering with words, she took his hand and led him toward her bedroom, switching on the small bedside lamp that cast everything in warm, golden light. Her room was simple: white linens, a few framed photos, books stacked on the nightstand. But with Ashton standing in the doorway, it felt transformed into something magical. "I've imagined this," she said, turning to face him. "Not just tonight, but us, together. A real relationship, waking up next to you, fighting about what to watch on Netflix, meeting your business partners and having them wonder how someone like you ended up with someone like me." "Someone like you?" His eyebrows drew together. "Lee, you realize you're extraordinary, right? You're brilliant and kind and beautiful, and strong enough to handle my anxiety attacks when hotel deals go wrong. Any business partner who meets you is going to wonder how someone like me got lucky enough to deserve you." She started to protest, but he silenced her with another kiss, this one deeper, more urgent. His hands tangled in her hair, and she could taste the coffee he'd had that morning, could smell the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with something uniquely him. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Leora reached for the hem of her sweater. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried, her eyes never leaving his face as she pulled the soft fabric over her head and let it fall to the floor. Ashton's gaze was reverent, worshipful. "Godly, you're so beautiful. You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it because I have to." His voice was rough with emotion. "I'm saying it because it's true, because I've been trying not to notice how beautiful you are for 20 years, and tonight I finally get to tell you." She reached for him then, her fingers working at the buttons of his shirt with a confidence that surprised them both. Each piece of clothing that fell away felt like shedding old skin, old fears, old versions of themselves that had been too afraid to want what they wanted. When they finally came together, skin against skin, heart against heart, it was with a tenderness that made Leora understand why she'd waited, why every other possibility had felt wrong, why her body had known, even when her mind hadn't, that this was what love was supposed to feel like. "I love you," Ashton whispered against her throat, and the words vibrated through her like music. "I love you so much, Lee." "I love you too," she whispered back, and felt something inside her chest expand and settle, like a missing piece finally clicking into place. Outside, Seattle continued its nightly rhythm. Cars passing on the street below, the distant sound of a train, the quiet hum of a city that never quite sleeps. But inside Leora's bedroom, time seemed suspended, holding them in a moment that felt both inevitable and miraculous. Later, much later, when they lay tangled together in sheets that smelled like lavender and new possibilities, Leora traced patterns on Ashton's chest and wondered how it was possible to feel so complete. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his fingers combing through her hair. "How this feels like the beginning of everything," she murmured against his skin. "Like our whole lives were just the prologue, and the real story starts now." He tightened his arms around her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I like that story." "Good," she said, smiling in the darkness, "because it's ours to write. And sometimes the most beautiful chapters are the ones that begin with two people finally brave enough to love each other exactly as they are. Sometimes the morning after feels like waking up in someone else's life, until you realize it's the life you've always wanted." Leora woke to the unfamiliar weight of an arm across her waist and the sound of steady breathing that wasn't her own. For a moment, caught in the hazy space between sleep and consciousness, she couldn't place where she was. Then Ashton shifted beside her, his hand finding hers beneath the covers, and the events of the previous night came flooding back like sunlight through parted curtains. She turned carefully, not wanting to wake him, and studied his face in the early morning light filtering through her bedroom window. Asleep, he looked younger somehow, the careful lines of stress and responsibility smoothed away. His dark hair was mussed against her pillow, and there was something achingly intimate about seeing him this vulnerable, this unguarded. "This is real," she thought, the reality of it hitting her with surprising force. "Ashton Reeves is in my bed. We made love. He told me he's been in love with me for 20 years. The magnitude of what had changed between them should have been overwhelming, but instead, Leora felt a deep sense of rightness, as if her life had finally clicked into focus after years of being slightly blurred around the edges. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Cassidy. "Coffee later? Need to hear about this mysterious life decision you're wrestling with." Leora smiled, imagining her sister's face when she told her the news. Cassidy had been predicting this outcome since college, insisting that the way Ashton looked at her was not platonically. Nobody looks at their friend like they want to memorize their face. "What's making you smile like that?" Ashton's voice was rough with sleep, and when she looked down, his eyes were open, watching her with an expression so tender it made her heart skip. "My sister. She's going to be insufferable when I tell her she was right about us." "Right about what?" "That you were in love with me and too stubborn to admit it." Leora traced her finger along his jawline, marveling at her newfound freedom to touch him this way. "She's been saying it for years." Ashton caught her hand and brought it to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her palm. "Smart woman. I should probably thank her for not giving up on me." "Don't encourage her. She already thinks she's psychic when it comes to romance." They lay in comfortable silence for a few minutes, hands intertwined, both adjusting to this new reality. Leora found herself cataloguing small details, the way Ashton's thumb traced circles on her wrist, how his presence made her usually anxious, morning thoughts quiet and still, the fact that waking up beside him felt more natural than 20 years of waking up alone. Lee? His voice carried a note of uncertainty that made her look at him more closely. What is it? Last night it was everything I dreamed it could be. More than I dreamed. He paused, seeming to gather courage. But I need you to know that this isn't just about the baby anymore. Even if it doesn't happen right away, or if it never happens. I want this. Us. I want to build a life with you regardless. Leora felt tears prick her eyes at the sincerity in his voice. Ash, do you think I would have slept with you if I thought this was just about fulfilling some agreement? Last night wasn't about making a baby. It was about making love. There's a difference. Relief flooded his features. I just needed to be sure you knew, that you understood this is real for me. It's real for me too. She leaned down and kissed him softly, which is why we need to talk about what happens next. The practical stuff. Ashton groaned and pulled a pillow over his face. Can't we stay in bed and pretend the practical stuff doesn't exist? We could, Leora agreed, tugging the pillow away from him. But then my sister will show up here in approximately 3 hours, wondering why I missed our coffee date, and I'm not ready to explain why there's a strange man's car in my parking space. Strange man? Ashton raised an eyebrow. I've been in your life for 20 years. I think that disqualifies me from strange. Fine. Why there's a devastatingly handsome hotel mogul in my bed who I'm secretly in love with. Secretly? He sat up, his hair sticking up at impossible angles. I thought we were past secrets. Leora laughed, reaching up to smooth his hair down. You know what I mean. We need to figure out how to tell people how to navigate this change. Whether you're going to keep your apartment or if we're going to move in together. The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and the weight of decisions that would reshape both their lives. I mean, eventually. Maybe, if you want to. Leora felt heat creep up her neck. God, I sound like I'm 17. You sound like someone who's trying to figure out how to blend 2 separate lives into one shared one. Ashton took her hands, his expression serious. And for the record, yes, I want to move in together. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want our books mixed together on the same shelves and our coffee mugs in the same dishwasher. Your apartment is probably 3 times the size of mine, so we'll live in my apartment, or we'll find a new place together, or we'll buy a house with a big yard for the kids we might have someday. He shrugged, as if these weren't monumental life decisions. The details don't matter as much as the fact that we want the same thing. Leora stared at him, amazed by his certainty. How are you so calm about this? 12 hours ago we were friends, and now you're talking about buying houses together. Lee, 12 hours ago I was a man who'd been in love with his best friend for 20 years and was too afraid to do anything about it. Now I'm a man who gets to love her openly. The only thing that's changed is that I don't have to hide it anymore. A car door slammed outside, followed by the sound of footsteps on the stairs leading to her apartment. Leora's eyes widened in recognition of the particular rhythm of those footsteps. Oh no, oh no, no, no. She scrambled out of bed, grabbing her robe from the hook behind the door. That's Cassidy, she has a key, she's coming up here. Ashton sat up straighter, suddenly alert. Your sister is here? Now? She probably got worried when I didn't answer her text. Leora was frantically trying to make the bed look less obviously slept in by 2 people. Quick, get dressed, act natural. Natural? Ashton was already reaching for his scattered clothes. Lee, there's no version of natural that explains why I'm here at 7 in the morning wearing yesterday's clothes. The sound of a key in the front door lock made them both freeze. Leora, you better not be dead in there because I brought pastries and I'm not eating them alone. Cassidy's voice carried through the apartment, getting closer. Leora looked at Ashton, who was hopping on one foot trying to get his pants on, and started laughing. The kind of helpless, hysterical laughter that comes when life becomes too absurd to process any other way. What's so funny? He whispered urgently. Us. This. The fact that we just declared our love and now we're about to get caught like teenagers by my sister. She kissed him quickly, tasting coffee and promises on his lips. Welcome to the reality of loving me, Ashton Rives. It comes with family interference. A knock on the bedroom door made them both jump. Lee, why is there a BMW in your parking spot? And why do I smell cologne that definitely doesn't belong to you? Leora looked at Ashton, who had managed to get mostly dressed and was now attempting to finger-comb his hair into something resembling respectability. She took a deep breath and opened the bedroom door. "Hi, Cass, I can explain everything. Because sometimes love means facing the music, even when the orchestra shows up earlier than expected. Sometimes the people who know you best are the ones who see your happiness before you even realize you're wearing it." Cassidy Fielding stood in the doorway of her sister's bedroom, taking in the scene before her with the sharp eyes of someone who'd been predicting this exact moment for the better part of a decade. Her gaze moved from Leora's flushed face to Ashton's hastily dressed form to the unmistakably rumpled bed behind them. A slow smile spread across her face. "Well, well, well." She crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe with the satisfied expression of someone whose conspiracy theories had just been validated. "Ashton Reeves, I was wondering when you'd finally stop being an idiot." "Cassidy," Leora warned, her voice carrying the particular tone sisters use when they're about to die of embarrassment. "What? I'm just saying what everyone's been thinking for years." Cassidy's smile widened as she looked between them. "Mum owes me $50, by the way. She bet it would take until you were both 40. Ashton ran a hand through his hair, looking like he wasn't sure whether to laugh or flee. "Your family bets on your love life?" "Oh, honey," Cassidy said, walking fully into the room and settling herself on the edge of the bed like she owned the place. "My family has been betting on your love life. We've had a pool running since Lee's college graduation. Uncle Jerome had money on you two eloping in Vegas. Aunt Rita thought it would happen at a wedding, someone else's wedding where you'd both get emotional and finally confess." "Cassidy," Leora's voice was strangled with mortification. "I had money on a medical emergency," Cassidy continued, clearly enjoying herself. "Something dramatic where one of you almost died and the other realized they couldn't live without—" Wait. Her expression shifted as she really looked at them, taking in the subtle signs of emotional intensity beyond just physical intimacy. "This wasn't just a random hookup, was it? Something happened. Something big." Leora sank down onto the bed beside her sister, suddenly looking exhausted. "It's complicated." "Complicated how?" Cassidy's voice gentled, her teasing replaced by genuine concern. "Ash, you look like you've been through an emotional blender. And Lee, you're glowing but also look like you've been crying. What's going on?" Ashton and Leora exchanged a look, 20 years of friendship compressed into a single glance that somehow conveyed the need for honesty, the weight of recent revelations, and the trust that came with truly knowing someone. "Ashton asked me to have his baby," Leora said simply. The silence that followed was profound. Cassidy's eyes widened, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to process information that didn't compute. "I'm sorry, what?" "Medical thing," Ashton said quietly. "Fertility issues. I might not have much time left to have children, and Lee is the only person I trust enough to ask." "And you said yes?" Cassidy turned to her sister, her voice climbing toward the upper registers of disbelief. "I said yes, but with conditions." Leora's cheeks were pink, but her voice was steady. "I told him that if we were going to do this, it had to be real. No clinical procedures, no emotional detachment. If I was going to give him a baby, he had to want me, not just accept my offer." Cassidy stared at them both for a long moment, then started laughing. Not the gentle laughter of amusement, but the helpless, slightly hysterical laughter of someone whose mind has just been completely blown. Oh my God, Lee. You basically forced him to confess that he's in love with you by agreeing to have his baby. That's either the most romantic thing I've ever heard or the most manipulative, and I honestly can't decide which." "It wasn't manipulation," Ashton said, his voice firm. "She was right. I was hiding behind the baby thing because I was too afraid to tell her how I really felt. She just called me on it." "And how do you really feel?" Cassidy asked, her expression shifting into protective older sister mode. Ashton looked at Leora, his expression so tender it made Cassidy's chest tight. "I'm in love with her. I've been in love with her since we were kids. She's the best person I know, and I want to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve her." "Good answer," Cassidy nodded approvingly. "Lee, how are you feeling about all this?" Leora reached for Ashton's hand, intertwining their fingers with a naturalness that spoke of comfort and choice. "Like I've been waiting my whole life for him to see me the way he looked at me last night. Like everything that happened before was just preparation for this." "And the baby thing? We'll see what happens," Leora said softly. "But even if it doesn't happen right away, or ever, we want to be together." "The baby was just the catalyst that made us both brave enough to admit what we wanted." Cassidy was quiet for a moment, studying their joined hands, the way they unconsciously leaned toward each other, the soft happiness that seemed to radiate from both of them despite the complexity of their situation. "You know what's funny?" she said finally. "I always thought when this moment came I'd want to give you both a hard time. Make Ashton sweat a little. Make sure he knew how precious Lee is. Do the whole protective sister thing." "And now?" Ashton asked. "Now I'm looking at my sister, and she's glowing in a way I've never seen before. She looks complete, like she's finally exactly where she's supposed to be." Cassidy smiled, tears gathering in her eyes. "And you, Ashton Rives, look like someone just handed you the keys to paradise, and you can't quite believe you get to keep them." She stood up, smoothing down her jacket with sudden briskness. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to go downstairs and make coffee for all of us, while you two get properly dressed and figure out how you want to tell the rest of the family. Mom's going to cry, Dad's going to want to have the talk with Ashton about treating his daughter right, and Uncle Jerome is going to be disappointed that you didn't elope in Vegas." She paused at the doorway, looking back at them with an expression that mixed joy and satisfaction and deep, abiding love. "But mostly, everyone's going to be happy, because we all love you both, and we've all been waiting for you to figure out that you belong together." After she left, Ashton and Leora sat in the sudden quiet of the bedroom, hands still clasped, processing the whirlwind of the last few minutes. "Your family bets on our love life," Ashton said finally. "Apparently so." Leora squeezed his hand. "Are you okay with that? With them? They can be a lot." Ashton brought their joined hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "Lee, I've wanted to be part of your family since I was 17 years old. The fact that they've been rooting for us just makes it better." From downstairs they could hear Cassidy moving around the kitchen, the familiar sounds of coffee being made and pastries being arranged. Normal morning sounds that somehow felt different now, weighted with the promise of new traditions, new routines, new ways of being together. "Ready to go, face the music?" Leora asked. "With you, I'm ready for anything. Because sometimes the best love stories aren't just about two people falling for each other, they're about two people finding their way home. Sometimes the most life-changing moments come disguised as ordinary Tuesday mornings." 3 weeks later, Leora stood in the pharmacy aisle at Walgreens, staring at an array of pregnancy tests with the same intensity she usually reserved for selecting the perfect book for a struggling student. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and somewhere in the store a child was having a meltdown about candy, while their parent negotiated in increasingly desperate tones. Normal life continuing around her, while she held the possibility of everything changing in her hands. Her period was 5 days late. 5 days wasn't necessarily significant. Stress could cause delays, and God knew the last month had been emotionally intense enough to throw off anyone's cycle. She and Ashton had been living in a bubble of newfound love, splitting time between his downtown apartment and her cozy place, learning the rhythm of being together in ways that went beyond friendship. But 5 days was also long enough to hope. She grabbed 2 different brands of tests, better to be thorough, and made her way to the checkout counter, trying to look casual, as if buying pregnancy tests was something she did all the time, as if her heart wasn't hammering against her ribs with each step. The teenage cashier barely glanced at her purchases, more interested in the text conversation happening on his phone than in her life-altering purchases. "Have a nice day," he mumbled, handing her the bag. "You too," she wanted to say. "And thank you for your complete disinterest in the fact that I might be about to find out if I'm carrying the baby of the man I've loved for 20 years. Instead, she just nodded and walked out into the crisp October afternoon. Back in her apartment, Leora set the bag on her kitchen counter and stared at it like it might explode. Ashton was in Portland for the day, handling some issue with the hotel's new restaurant, and she was grateful for the solitude. This felt like something she needed to do alone first, to process whatever the result might be before sharing it with him. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ashton. "Miss you. Meeting running long but should be home by dinner. Love you. Home." He'd started calling her apartment home, and every time he said it, something warm unfurled in her chest. They'd been talking about finding a place together, somewhere bigger, somewhere that belonged to both of them. But for now her small space had become their sanctuary. She typed back, "Miss you too, safe travels, love you more." It was true. She did love him more with each passing day, in ways that surprised her with their depth and complexity. She loved the way he made coffee in the morning, humming unconsciously as he moved through her kitchen. She loved how he read over her shoulder when she was grading papers, occasionally offering gentle suggestions for her students. She loved the way he held her at night, like she was something precious he was afraid of losing. But mostly, she loved the way he looked at her now, without reservation, without the careful distance he'd maintained for 20 years, like she was exactly what he'd been searching for his whole life. The pregnancy tests felt heavier than they should when she finally picked up the bag and headed toward the bathroom. 2 pink lines. Leora sat on the edge of her bathtub, staring at the test in her hands, then at the second test she'd taken just to be sure. Both showed the same result, clear and unmistakable. Pregnant. She was pregnant with Ashton's baby. The magnitude of it hit her in waves. Joy, terror, excitement, anxiety, love so profound it made her chest ache, all of it swirling together into something too big for her small bathroom to contain. She was going to be a mother. Ashton was going to be a father. They were going to create a life together, a family born from friendship and love, and 20 years of growing toward this moment. Her hands shook as she set the tests on the counter and pulled out her phone. She started to dial Ashton's number, then stopped. This news deserved better than a phone call while he was stuck in a business meeting. It deserved a moment, a memory, something special they could look back on years from now when their child asked about the day they found out. Instead, she called Cassidy. "Lee, what's wrong? You sound weird. I need you to come over right now and bring champagne. The good stuff." "Champagne? It's 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Are you having some kind of breakdown?" Leora laughed, the sound somewhere between tears and hysteria. "The opposite, actually. But I can't tell you over the phone. I need you here. I'm leaving work now. 20 minutes. Cassidy made it in 15, probably breaking several traffic laws in the process. She burst through the front door with a bottle of Dom Perignon and an expression of barely contained curiosity. "Okay, spill. What's going on? Did Ashton propose? Did you win the lottery? She stopped mid-sentence, her gaze falling on the pregnancy tests, still sitting on the bathroom counter, visible through the open door. "Oh my God, Lee. Are you?" Leora nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm pregnant, Cass. I'm actually pregnant." Cassidy dropped the champagne bottle onto the couch and swept her sister into a hug so fierce it nearly knocked them both over. "I'm going to be an aunt. Oh my God, I'm going to be the best aunt in the history of aunts. I'm going to spoil this baby so thoroughly you'll regret ever telling me." They cried together, laughing through the tears, holding each other in the way that only sisters can when life delivers something too beautiful to process alone. "Have you told Ashton?" Cassidy asked when they finally pulled apart. "Not yet. He's in Portland. I want to tell him in person. Make it special." "How are you going to do it?" Leora wiped her eyes, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "I have an idea, but I'm going to need your help." That evening, Ashton came home to find his favorite takeout from the Thai place they'd discovered on their 3rd official date waiting on the kitchen table, along with candles and the good wine glasses they usually saved for special occasions. "This is nice," he said, kissing her hello with the easy affection that still made her heart skip. "What's the occasion? Can't I do something nice for my boyfriend without a reason?" "You absolutely can. I'm just suspicious because you're practically vibrating with nervous energy." He studied her face with the attention of someone who'd been reading her expressions for 20 years. "Lee, what's going on?" Instead of answering, she handed him a small, wrapped box. "I got you something. It's not my birthday. Just open it." Inside the box, nestled in tissue paper, was a small wooden picture frame. The photo inside showed the 2 pregnancy tests, side by side, with a handwritten note beneath them. "Our greatest adventure begins now." Ashton stared at the frame for a long moment, his face cycling through confusion, understanding, and finally, wonder so profound it transformed his entire expression. "Lee, we're having a baby, Ash." The words came out in a rush of joy and tears. "I'm pregnant. We're going to be parents." He set the frame down carefully, as if it were made of spun glass, then pulled her into his arms with a gentleness that spoke of reverence and awe. "We're having a baby," he whispered against her hair, and she could hear the tears in his voice. "God, Lee, we're really having a baby." They held each other in the flickering candlelight, surrounded by the smell of pad thai and the weight of a future suddenly bright with possibility. And in that moment, Leora understood that some dreams don't just come true, they exceed every hope you ever dared to hold. Because sometimes the most ordinary moments become extraordinary when they're shared with the person you love most in the world. Some moments are so perfect they feel like destiny, finally catching up with your dreams. 6 weeks later, On a crisp December morning when Seattle was draped in the kind of fog that made the city look like a watercolor painting, Ashton woke up before his alarm and knew with absolute certainty that today was the day. He'd been carrying his grandmother's engagement ring in his jacket pocket for 2 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. But as he watched Leora sleep beside him, one hand unconsciously resting on the small curve of her belly where their baby was growing, he realized that perfection wasn't about grand gestures or elaborate plans. Perfection was this: morning light filtering through curtains, the woman he loved safe in his arms, and a future stretching ahead of them filled with possibilities he'd never dared to imagine. "Lee," he whispered, pressing a soft kiss to her shoulder. "Wake up, beautiful." She stirred, turning toward him with that sleepy smile that never failed to make his heart race. At 12 weeks pregnant, she was just beginning to show, and every day brought new wonder at the miracle they'd created together. "Morning," she murmured, her voice still thick with sleep. "What time is it?" "Early, but I have something I want to show you. If it involves leaving this bed, I'm not interested. Your baby is making me tired all the time." Your baby. She'd been saying that lately, as if the child growing inside her belonged to him alone, as if she were just the vessel rather than the woman giving them both the greatest gift of their lives. "Our baby," he corrected gently, the way he always did. "And yes, it involves leaving the bed, but I promise it'll be worth it." 20 minutes later, they were walking through Pike Place Market in the early morning quiet before the vendors opened, when the space belonged to delivery trucks and the occasional early jogger, rather than the usual chaos of tourists and shoppers. "Ash, what are we doing here?" Leora asked, her breath visible in small puffs of steam in the cold air. "Everything's closed." "Not everything." He led her toward their usual spot by the overlook, where Elliott Bay stretched out before them grey and endless under the winter sky. "You're being mysterious. I don't like mysterious before coffee. Trust me." And she did. After 20 years of friendship and 3 months of love that felt both brand new and ancient, trust was as natural as breathing between them. When they reached the railing where they'd stood that day when she'd said yes to his impossible request, Ashton stopped and turned to face her. His hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from the magnitude of what he was about to do. "Do you remember the first time we came here together?" he asked. "Of course. You were trying to make me feel better about moving to Seattle for grad school. I was homesick and overwhelmed, and you bought me coffee that didn't taste like dishwater and told me this city could become home if I let it. And was I right?" Leora looked around at the market beginning to wake up around them, at the city emerging from fog like something from a fairy tale, at the water reflecting the pale winter light. But mostly, she looked at him. "You were right about a lot of things." Ashton reached into his jacket pocket, his fingers closing around the small velvet box that had belonged to his grandmother, that had waited 60 years to find its way to the right woman. "I've been thinking about that conversation a lot lately, about home and what it means and how sometimes the thing you're looking for has been right in front of you all along." He dropped to one knee right there on the empty market plaza, pulling out the ring box as Leora's hand flew to her mouth in shock. "Leora Fielding, you've been my home since we were 17 years old. You've been my safe harbor, my conscience, my best friend, and now the love of my life. You're carrying our child, and every day I get to love you feels like a gift I don't deserve, but am grateful for anyway." Tears were streaming down her face now, and her free hand had moved to rest on her belly where their baby was growing. "I know we're doing everything backwards, baby first, proposal second. But I don't care about the order anymore. I just care about the promise, about choosing each other every single day for the rest of our lives." He opened the box, revealing a vintage Art Deco ring with a center diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the morning light like captured stars. "Will you marry me, Lee? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of your love? Will you build a family with me and grow old with me and argue with me about books until we're 90? For a moment, the only sound was the distant cry of seagulls and the gentle lapping of water against the pier below. Leora stared down at him, this man who'd been beside her through every important moment of her adult life, who was now offering her forever. "You want to know something funny?" she said, her voice thick with tears and laughter. "What? I used to have dreams about this moment, about you proposing to me. But in my dreams, I was always so surprised, like I never saw it coming." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "But standing here now, it doesn't feel like a surprise at all. It feels like the most natural thing in the world, like we've been moving toward this moment our entire lives." Is that a yes? Ashton Reeves, I have been saying yes to you in my heart for 20 years. Of course it's a yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, then stood and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed and cried simultaneously. Other people had begun to filter into the market, early vendors setting up their stalls, joggers completing their morning routes, and several stopped to applaud when they realized what they'd witnessed. "We're engaged," Leora whispered against his lips when he finally set her down. "We're engaged," he confirmed, his voice full of wonder. "And we're having a baby. And we're going to live happily ever after. That's a pretty big promise. Good thing we have the rest of our lives to keep it." They stood there holding each other as Seattle woke up around them, as the fog lifted to reveal a city painted in shades of possibility, as their future stretched ahead, bright and beautiful, and theirs. "So when do you want to get married?" Ashton asked. Leora looked down at the ring on her finger, then up at the man who just promised her forever. "As soon as possible. I've waited 20 years to be your wife. I don't want to wait any longer. Even if that means planning a wedding while pregnant. Especially because it means planning a wedding while pregnant. I want our baby to be born into a family that's already official. I want them to know from day one that their parents chose each other and chose them and built something beautiful together." Ashton kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promises, while the market bustled to life around them, and their love story finally got the happy beginning it had always deserved, because sometimes the most beautiful endings are really just the start of something even more wonderful. 3 years later, some love stories don't end, they just keep getting more beautiful. The late afternoon sun filtered through the kitchen windows of their Magnolia home, casting golden light across the hardwood floors where 2-year-old Dylan Reeves was building an elaborate tower out of wooden blocks, his dark curls, so much like his father's, falling into his eyes as he worked with the serious concentration that only toddlers could muster. Leora stood at the kitchen island, one hand resting on her rounded belly where their second child was growing, watching her son and feeling that familiar flutter of contentment that had become the soundtrack of her days. At 6 months pregnant, she was carrying this baby differently than Dylan, higher, smaller, and with none of the morning sickness that had made the first trimester with her son such a challenge. "Mama, look!" Dylan called out, pointing proudly at his creation. "Big tower. It's beautiful, baby. You're such a good builder." Through the window, she could see Ashton in the backyard, putting the finishing touches on the swing set they'd been working on together for the past month. He'd insisted on building it himself, claiming that store-bought playgrounds lacked soul. Watching him now, sleeves rolled up and hair mussed from a day of manual labor, Leora felt the same rush of love that had caught her by surprise 3 years ago and had only grown stronger with time. Marriage to Ashton had been everything she'd dreamed and nothing like what she'd expected. Easier in some ways, they'd known each other so well that the adjustment period most couples struggled with had been minimal. Harder in others, learning to balance his high-pressure business world with her quieter academic life, navigating the sleepless nights of new parenthood, figuring out how to be partners in every sense of the word rather than just best friends who happened to be in love. But through all of it, the foundation had remained solid. 23 years of friendship, 4 years of marriage, and the bone-deep certainty that they were exactly where they belonged. The front door opened, and Cassidy's voice carried through the house. "Where's my favorite nephew? Aunt Cass?" Dylan abandoned his blocks and ran toward the entryway on chubby legs, launching himself into his aunt's arms with the fearlessness of a child who'd never doubted he was loved. "And where's my favorite sister-in-law?" Cassidy appeared in the kitchen, with Dylan perched on her hip, looking radiant in the way that came from being 8 months into a pregnancy of her own. "Right here feeling like a whale and questioning my decision to have children less than 3 years apart. Please, you look gorgeous. Ashton's going to take one look at you and get that dopey expression he gets when he remembers you're his wife." It was true. Even after 4 years of marriage, Ashton still sometimes looked at her like he couldn't quite believe his luck. And if she was being honest, she felt the same way about him. "How are you feeling?" Leora asked, noting the way Cassidy was carrying herself. "Any day now, right?" "Any day. Jerome's convinced it's going to be tonight because I nested all morning, reorganized the entire nursery, and then scrubbed the bathroom grout with a toothbrush." "That does sound ominous." They were interrupted by the sound of the back door opening, followed by Ashton's voice. "Is that my sister-in-law I hear? The one who owes me $50 from the Seahawks game? The one who's about to make you an uncle again any minute now, so you better be nice to me," Cassidy called back. Ashton appeared in the kitchen, grass stains on his jeans and sawdust in his hair, and immediately moved to Leora's side, his hand finding the small of her back in the automatic gesture of a man who'd learned to support his pregnant wife without thinking about it. "How's the little one today?" he asked, his other hand settling on her belly. "Active. I think she's going to be a soccer player." "She?" Leora smiled, enjoying the surprise on his face. "Doctor, Martinez called this morning with the results from last week's ultrasound. We're having a daughter." The expression that crossed Ashton's face was everything Cassidy had predicted, and more. Wonder, joy, and a tenderness so profound it made Leora's chest tight with love. "A daughter," he repeated softly. "Dylan's going to have a little sister. And you're going to have a daddy's girl who's going to wrap you around her finger from day one," Cassidy added, with a knowing grin. "I can live with that." Later that evening, after Cassidy had gone home to wait for labor to begin and Dylan was asleep in his crib, Leora and Ashton sat on their back porch, watching the last light fade from the sky. The swing set stood completed in the yard, waiting for tomorrow's adventures, and the air was warm with the promise of summer. "Are you happy?" Ashton asked, the question he'd been asking her regularly since their wedding day, as if he needed constant reassurance that she hadn't changed her mind about their life together. "Deliriously," she answered, the same response she always gave because it was always true. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible." He pulled her closer, careful of her belly. "Sometimes I wake up and can't believe this is real, that you're my wife, that Dylan calls me daddy, that we're about to have another baby. It's real." She turned to look at him, studying the face that had become more dear to her with each passing day. "We're real. This family we built, it's real. I love you, Mrs. Reeves. I love you too, Mr. Reeves." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead, two people who'd found their way to each other after 20 years of friendship and 4 years of marriage that felt like both forever and the beginning. Inside the house, Dylan stirred in his sleep, making the soft sounds that meant he was dreaming. In a few months there would be another crib in the nursery, another little voice calling for Mama and Daddy, another heartbeat adding to the rhythm of their family. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't gotten that diagnosis?" Leora asked suddenly. "If you'd never asked me to have your baby?" Ashton considered the question seriously, the way he always did when she asked him something important. "I think we would have found our way to each other eventually. Maybe it would have taken longer. Maybe we would have had to lose each other first to realize what we had, but I don't think the universe would have let us miss each other forever." "That's very romantic for a hotel mogul." "I'm a romantic hotel mogul married to a librarian who believes in happy endings. It comes with the territory." Leora laughed, the sound carrying across their backyard and into the night air. "Good point." As they finally made their way inside, turning off lights and checking on Dylan one last time before bed, Leora caught sight of their wedding photo on the hallway table. They'd married in Savannah 6 months after their engagement, in a small ceremony surrounded by family and the Spanish moss-draped trees that had featured in every romantic dream she'd ever had. In the photo, she was glowing with early pregnancy and absolute joy, while Ashton looked like a man who'd just been handed everything he'd ever wanted. They were both laughing at something Cassidy had said from behind the photographer, and their happiness was so evident it practically radiated from the frame. "Best decision I ever made," Ashton murmured, following her gaze. "Asking me to have your baby. Asking you to marry me. The baby was just the excuse I needed to finally be brave enough to go after what I'd wanted all along." Later, lying in bed with Ashton's arm around her and their daughter moving gently beneath her ribs, Leora thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From friendship to love, from a desperate request to a lifetime commitment, from two people afraid of vulnerability to a family built on trust and hope, and the kind of love that only grew stronger with time. Some stories, she reflected drowsily, don't have endings. They just have new chapters, each one more beautiful than the last. And as sleep finally claimed her, surrounded by the sounds of the family they'd created together, Leora Reeves smiled and prepared to dream of all the chapters still to come. A final message to you. What strikes you most about this story? The way love can hide in plain sight for 20 years? The courage it takes to risk a friendship for something deeper? Or maybe how the most beautiful families are built not just on passion, but on genuine friendship and choosing each other every single day? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.